How is AI reshaping and changing the music industry, from composition to production and everything in between? Should there be a separate award ceremony for AI music artists? Neel Lee Chauhan, founder of Mind Labs and Much Music DJ, turned tech entrepreneur, joins me to uncover the ethical dilemmas, creative potentials, and future possibilities of AI in music. Join us as we get rebelliously curious. Neel Lee, thank you so much for joining me on Rebelliously Curious today. I love these conversations of intersection of art and culture and technology. They are my favorite, as anyone knows listening to this podcast, how much I get excited about having these discussions. So thank you so much for joining me today on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Chrissy.
There's these intersections between music and technology that are happening right now, and specifically artificial intelligence. You are on the forefront of that, working and developing AI music. So before we get into what Mind Labs does, I'd like to get into your background. Can you tell me a little bit about your background within the music industry and then how you found yourself in artificial intelligence or working in artificial intelligence, I should say?
I'd be happy to, Chrissy. Yeah, so I grew up in Toronto and was very passionate about the evolution of music from analog, so to speak, to digital. And a lot of that was as house music and techno and drum and bass was really rapidly gaining traction in major cities around the world, including Toronto, New York, and London. And I started off my DJ career in Toronto really in the underground, playing in raves. And this is in the mid 1990s. We had these massive events with 5,000, sometimes 10, 15,000 people where there'd be no announced location. You'd meet at Union Station and we would bus people to these really incredible, authentic events. And that's kind of how I got my start. And I always stayed in the raves, in the warehouse parties. And that eventually evolved to being a club DJ. Used to play regularly on Much Music on a show called Electric Circus and on a couple radio shows in Toronto. But it was a great 6-7 year stint, and that sort of covers the beginning of my DJing and music career. And at some point, when I had finished college at Toronto Metropolitan University, I had this passion for technology, and I decided to pursue that overseas. So I actually initially went over to London, and I studied management information systems at the London School of Economics, where my father had been many, many years before me, and ended up working in technology consulting at a company called Anderson there. And I was really able to kind of nurture my passion for technology and business, which is something that I always wanted to do. And I always wanted to get to apply that in the music industry, but I kind of got lost. So I then worked in startups, was an early stage employee at Nectar, which brought the Air Miles coalition model, which was pioneered in Canada, over to the UK, which was a lot of fun. And I then brought myself over to the United States, where I delved much deeper into technology. I started to invest in technology startups. An early one was Yodel. And I was selected to work at Google as one of the earlier stage employees in Mountain View in California, where I think I was one of the first 10, 20,000. And we scaled very rapidly at Google. And that's really where I got a really deep understanding of machine learning, predictive technologies, and other artificial intelligence technologies that could be used to provide a better experience in search and advertising. So over those 5 years in Mountain View, California at Google, I nurtured that passion. And then I chose to take that back and apply it in other corporate environments. But what I didn't realize is I hadn't really found myself again. I always had this original passion to bring that technology experience and business experience back to music, but never quite did until I actually had kids and realized I wanted to instill a passion and creativity in them like I had in myself. And that's kind of how I came back around full circle after 20 years out of the music industry and founded Mind Lab with my two sons, Evan and Ethan.
Wow. And so, correct me if I'm wrong, Mind Labs works and develops artificial intelligence, AI, EDM based music. And I should say, I was jamming this morning to the 5 tracks that was sent to me. And I believe you do have more, but there are 5 tracks. And I think you had, were number one in Germany for a while, and you've had, I believe, over 1 million downloads. Correct me on those stats if I'm wrong, but I should just say the music's amazing. And to be honest, I'm sometimes on the fence with AI creative art.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just starting, right? We're in the infancy of it. So, I was like, let's see, and then I listened and I'm like, the first track, I believe it's called Jump. I was like, this is so good. And I literally, and I'm not just saying this, I sent it to my girlfriends who love EDM this morning. And I was like, what do you think? And so that made me really excited because I was like, this is like really good. And hopefully, if I can, you'll let me play a snippet of it in the show so people can get a sense of what I'm talking about and listen to it, enjoy it as well. But what exactly is there anything else that Mind Labs does? And is the fundamental basis just music to start, and specifically EDM music?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and I'll give you the sort of the backdrop for how we founded Mind Lab. So I was with my boys, and they both play ice hockey as good Canadians. We live here in the New York area. They both play for the Junior Devils, and what I noticed, they were listening to a lot of music on their way to games, and they started to put headphones in, and I noticed that whenever both my kids were listening to their favorite EDM tracks, which they're big fans of, they would skate faster with better focus and better accuracy. And at the time, I had just assumed a role as on the board of governors of Toronto Metropolitan University. And those two things came together, and I was very curious, like, what is going on here? How could they be skating faster, more focused, more engaged when listening to their favorite tracks? So I ended up pulling together a team from both Google and Toronto Metropolitan University, and we commissioned a study of all the existing academic literature globally on human performance and music. And what we found was the research overwhelmingly over multiple decades says that music does drive human performance, focus, and engagement, including in sports, in work, coding, and countless use cases. So that became the research or scientific foundation for the founding of Mind Labs. And the name is no mistake, it's Mind and Labs, as in laboratories. So we're a research lab that engineers music that drives human performance. And where artificial intelligence and other modern technologies come in, we're using those technologies to accelerate the impact and the ability to, in an efficient and creative way, produce music that drives human performance. And that's the kind of history behind founding Mind Labs.
That's amazing. See, this is why culture and art and science, when they come together, they make the best creations. Like they just do. And I love that. I love that you're doing that. Can you can you share the process behind creating a track in Mind
Yeah.
Labs with AI? Because it might be a very different process, you can tell me, from working in a studio with a producer and writing or, creating beats.
Yeah.
Is it similar or is it different within the AI space?
Yeah. And I'd say, we're developing music the same way you would develop software. So historically, in an artistic way, as a technologist, I view the more traditional way of producing music, like I did when I was a DJ in Toronto, as being very tightly coupled. So one or two artists, sometimes three, make all the decisions on the music in a tightly coupled way. Mind Lab is the complete opposite. So it's much more distributed, like the way you produce a very large software package, which is what I've done for the past 10 to 20 years. And we have multiple engineers and we have multiple producers and artists, and they work in a distributed way. And to answer your question, the process for creating the music, we come up with tracks. We use artificial intelligence software for coming up with our brand, our logo. All of our videos are created using AI, all of our cover art. So at the front end of the process on the marketing and the brand design, that's all done using, best of breed AI tools. When you get into each individual track, what we do, we have a two-part model. We have a main mix, which is led by the artists, and the artists have a track name, and they produce a piece of electronic dance music. So a good example is a track we did with a Canadian artist called Ricky Ayala. So we did a remix of Ricky Ayala's hit song Toxic, and the artist took the lead on the main mix. Then what we do is we do a second mix, which we call the lab mix, where we incorporate all the our artificial intelligence technologies into that. So we do voice prints. So we might take the voice print of MindLab, one of us, and we took Ricky Ayala's voice and we created a duet for the Toxic Lab mix between Ricky Ayala and MindLab. And we use artificial intelligence for different sound effects and warps in the music. Those are a couple of examples. Additional examples, sometimes if we add rap lyrics, we'll do text to voice and use an actual artificial intelligence generated voice to create a voice so there's actually no human involved. But right now, at the current stage, we're doing a lot with voice, sound design, and sound effects with AI, and that's all in the lab mix. And I might add, the lab mix is led by an engineer. So you get this dichotomy where the main mix is led by an artist and the lab mix is led by an engineer.
So you're moving me into my next question that I have here is talking about the human life experience that goes into art. And humans create art through their experience and self-expression. But then on the other hand, you have AI now, and AI is using algorithms and data to create that experience, not through life experiences, right? And through to use art to purvey or to create messaging. So
Yeah.
over time, do you have a fear that the human experience based in art, and let's use music obviously as this conduit, that it might be diluted because AI will overrule that?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. And there's some, very legitimate questions and concerns that are posed with respect to AI. I can just give you my perspective. From my
Totally.
perspective, I think AI is really helping to change the music process. So I think the actual output is different. And that to me is very creative. So, for example, you wouldn't have been able to do a duet with a female vocalist and an algorithm without the AI technology we're leveraging. And in addition to that, it's changed the music process. So we do have other technologies that we use to create an entire track by scratch. So, my son goes by the name Evan C, and myself, my co-producer, Andrew Hogarth, and our keyboardist, Trevor Bell, we put in an input prompt just last weekend for a new EDM track called All Night Long. And we put about a 2 sentence input prompt into a proprietary AI package, and the entire track, vocals were written, and beat came out in literally 60 seconds. So my perspective would be that AI is not only enabling creativity in different forms of sound and voice, it's also enabling much more rapid creation of music. And that is going to lead ultimately to more music and more choice. So my perspective is it provides more choice, more creativity. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I can see that there for sure you're creating more music in the space and content is always king. I would say that recording artist Grimes and producer and writer, unbelievable artist, electronic music artist, love her work and Canadian as well. Lots of Canadians in this conversation. Always love that. Uh, she's really grabbed she's really took hold of AI. I believe, if I'm correct me if I'm wrong again, if she was the one that let her all of her music and her voice and pretty much put that as an open source so that other artists could use her work within their work and with a generated AI work.
Absolutely. Grimes is at the forefront. I do believe you're correct in terms of making that available. And there was that song that went viral. And since that, and I think that was about 6 months or 9 months ago, since then, you're able to get access through different tools to different open source vocals that are available online. So, in fact, I think many people with AI generated voices will be able to create music that previously weren't able to create music. Because right now, if you want to create a vocal track, whether that be an EDM track, a house music track, even a pop track, you could create a track without having to actually access a professional vocalist. And as a result of that, more people will create vocals, more people will create music. The interesting twist to all this, as we've been growing Mind Labs, is that ultimately, even if you create a full AI track with a purely algorithmic developed voice, you'll ultimately need a human, an amazing vocalist, male, female, or otherwise, to perform that track. And I think it's quite well known that performance is where a lot of the monetization has been for music, is in live performance. And ultimately, I think the crowds are going to want to see live performance. So even if there is algorithm created tracks, there'll be remixes and there'll be people designated to do the live performance. And that's kind of what we're seeing as we're growing our music and doing AI only tracks and also AI human collaborations.
Yeah, I have a question. You're hitting all of them. Thank you. Talking about performances, are we going to have more performers than singers? Because there is a difference, as many people might not think. Jennifer Lopez, if people want to fight me on this, is a performer. She's not a singer. Mariah Carey is a singer. So do you think in the future, will this take away from what I'm hearing? Potentially not, but will it take away from actual vocalists that are not
Yeah.
saying that they're not performers, but their lead is a vocalist before being a performer on stage?
Yeah, that's a great question. Look, will it take away from performers? So my perspective is the opposite. I think because the actual cost of producing music and the barrier to production is going down, I think it's going to lead to more music being created. And ultimately, as we all know, at least in the electronic world, maybe not in the analog or acoustic world, there's multiple remixes of songs. So even if version A or version B use an algorithm, version C will have a human. And I have a real example. We're in the studio over the last couple of weeks. We're producing a track all night long. And we finally perfected our technology to the point where we're going with version A being an algorithm. And we've already got in mind another Canadian artist who hit actually #1 on Billboard that I can't announce now, that we're really excited, who's going to sing the remix version. So it's actually creating it a different version, and they work together. And it was very clear to us that we needed to have that complement. We needed that human touch. It's just coming in a different version of the track. So to answer your question, my perspective is that ultimately more music will get created, more singers will sing and collaborate with algorithms, and it will be a net positive for everyone.
What countries around the world do you feel are taking a hold of this and are doing it better than North Americans?
Yeah, that's a great question. A lot of the supplying technology has come out of the United States, Germany, United Kingdom, and some out of Canada. And that may be, albeit the technologies that I'm familiar with, I'm sure there's plenty coming out of Asia and Latin America as well. I can't say I've looked at everything, but I have seen for the genre that we're playing, we're getting the fastest traction in European countries. So Germany, as you mentioned before, our Toxic remix track hit top 10 in February, which we were very excited about. Germany's been top, Netherlands, and the UK. And those are traditional markets that have adopted electronic music. Um, and even historically, when house music had its origins in the United States, it was adopted and brought to the mainstream in Europe. So we're seeing that pattern with MindLab as well. Although after 6 months, I would say the uptake in the United States and Canada has been quite significant, and in Latin America as well. So it's catching up pretty quick. I would say I'm not sure that the average listener is distinguishing. So I think the average listener is seeking great music, and we haven't seen any, you know, we've sort of seen people adopt the music and save it on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon, and YouTube because they love the music. We don't believe it's actually directly connected to whether or not it's a human or a voice print that's producing or featuring in the music.
Yeah, it's like part of that subculture following. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter where you live in the world. If you love the music, you might have more accessibility, and there might be more cultural advantages to that. You can go to events and stuff because there's more of that going on. But you're right, you don't doesn't matter where you live, you can enjoy any type of music anywhere.
Yeah, exactly.
When we're looking at the evaluation of this from an awards perspective, how do we look at this from AI is not human? So
Yeah.
can we have AI compete with humans in award shows like the Grammys or the Junos, or do they totally need their separate own award show? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I did notice I know that I was looking at the criteria for the Junos. I know our publicist, our publicist Pennant Media Group had sent a number of their artists to the Junos, and I was just looking up the criteria for the Junos. So I'm a little more familiar with the Junos than I am with the Grammys from this one. And I think it depends on the category. So in the production category or the top popular track, um, I don't believe it would stop you from being an AI generated track. For vocal tracks, right now, most of the tracks are a hybrid right now. So I would imagine if you're a hybrid track and you're using AI, that you would still be eligible. I don't know offhand if you're an algorithm only, what the committee would say. I don't recall the language from the Juno award submissions. But it's a great question. I think ultimately it will be objective. I think ultimately you'll be allowed to submit. That's where I think it will go, and how long it takes to get there, whether it's 2 years, 5 or 10, I don't know, but that's where I think it will go.
Is there any pushback that you've had or seen within this space, and not even just for the company, just in general, the different type of pushback and different types
Yeah.
of other technology or other groups that are saying, "Hey, let's hold up on this before we have a better evolution of what our ethics is going to look like in place, or what does this mean to society?" What have you seen in your sphere?
Yeah. Yeah, you know what? I've got some really good like data points on that just from our team because we do have a team of 8 at Mind Lab, and I think my team knows I love them. So my lead producer is Andrew Hogarth. And he had a smash hit, "Don't Stop the Music," under the group Drunk Girl, out of New York. And my keyboardist is Trevor Bell, hailing from Ontario and also a fellow Toronto Metropolitan University graduate like myself. But I noticed amongst my own artist group, it took many, many months to get comfort level with AI. And part of that was the maturing of the technology, and part of it was comfort. So initially, I wrote the lyrics for a number of our vocal tracks initially on an LLM model, large language model, and I used a GPT-4 a couple times, and they sort of resisted that and were like, "Why would you write lyrics in this?" And oh, that's semi-coherent, and it was sort of an evolutionary process, and I think it's taken about 6 months to get the team more comfortable, and we're now finally in the last month at the point where we've been able to produce a track end to end, vocals, writing, beats, and everything with AI that we leveraged 80 to 90% of it for our lab mixes. So I think the answer is that it's a major change process, in particular for the artists. And I think the artist community is quite taken aback by this technology, maybe a little scared of it, a little concerned that it could affect the way they produce music or the demand for their services. But once they're on board, in the case, I can speak for Mind Lab, we've been able to get up and running and everybody's excited about it. We had to evolve the model where you have the artist main mix, the lab mix, which is AI and tech driven. That helped. In terms of the second part of your question on ethics, look, I think to some extent you could view AI and these modern technologies as just being an extension of all the digital music. We have been sampling music for 20 to 25 years. We've been warping bass lines. Keyboards used to be played live, right? And now they're played, you can do them in Ableton or Logic. You can create a bass line in Ableton or Logic without being a classically trained pianist. So to some extent, this is just an evolution of the same technologies that we've adopted with electronic dance music over the last 20 years.
Yeah. I can see that it's a tool, right? AI is a tool within all different areas right now, right? That's what its initial infancy is for us, right? It's a language tool right now. It's also being learned, it's being taught math and harder mathematics, and that will grow. But right now, of its infancy, it is language, right? It's communicating. So I can see that we are teaching AI right now, right? So we have a human element in it and we're giving and taking. And I hope that in the future, we still keep that, instead of having its own area where it becomes a human tool within us and also around us, right? Because it still has a human element when humans are teaching it, right? And so with that said, over time, and that's just the infancy now, but over time, we will see it grow and be something else potentially, right? Could be its
Absolutely.
own, right? Which could be scary or not. We'll see what happens, right? Hopefully, it's not a bad episode of
Well,
Black Mirror. Go on. No,
yeah,
I'd love to hear what you say. Yeah.
yeah, no, absolutely. And I'd say like when I think about it, I think about it as different technologies finding their way into music. Music has actually been slower to adopt social, mobile, and predictive technologies. AI is just one of the predictive technologies under that broader framework. And an additional example of infusing humanity into music and bringing it to scale using technology is social. So we just recently launched our Discord site. And as part of the way we produce music at Mind Lab, it's not just predictive technologies and scientific research. We're opening that up, and it's right in its infancy right now. So the entire music production process for Mind Lab is on our Discord site. And at each stage of the production process, we open it up and we do an A/B test. So this is something that's done in technology and in scientific research quite often, something we did a ton of at Google. And so, for example, when we pick our cover art, we put an A and a B on, and thousands and thousands of people choose which cover art do they like better. Then, when we initially produce the track, we put an A version and a B version, and the crowd decides which one they like better. And then at the final version, they pick. So what actually happens is we're eventually we're creating tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of micro producers that participate in the music creation process at Mind Lab and actually are able to help create our music. So I think that brings that human element and human involvement at mass scale, but you have to look at it holistically, not just within AI, but within the context of leveraging technology, social, mobile, and predictive in the music creation process.
Yeah. And I think that as the music industry is evolving and the sounds are evolving, we might be at this beginning of new genres. I look back at, for example, Grimes. She created a whole new category, I believe, on Spotify called ethereal. There's ethereal music, and I listen to it. I love that category. I love that she even campaigned for that because that's really her music, right? That's where people that like ethereal music would go and find her instead of through all different types of EDM or other subgenres. She made it easier. So, do you think that AI will be creating this whole new sound or whole new genres in the future? Because in the past, we've seen all of these mixes with country and pop, and we've stayed very formulaic. And then EDM has come out of that, which is also a subroot of other music. But now, because of AI, are we going to hear totally different sounds and different types of music than we've ever would imagine?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's a great question. And I think if we take a step back and look at how has technology and digital technology and music changed the evolution of it, I can speak to electronic dance music because I I know a lot about that area. It's evolved rapidly. So it started out with house music. Now you've got house, techno, melodic house, drum and bass. You have probably 15 different subgenres of house, 10 different subgenres of techno, many different subgenres of drum and bass, melodic drum and bass, hard hitting drum and bass, and now newer forms of electronic music like funk that have emerged. I would say that's been enabled by the technology, right? The ability to sample, the ability, Ableton, Logic, these digital music recorders and production programs are enabling that. And I think to your point, Chrissy, AI and other technologies that are introduced, including social, are going to further enable the evolution of that music. And similar to creating micro creators, they're going to create many more genres. There'll be micro genres of music. And one example is the track that you just mentioned. Our top track, "Jump," was a derivative of a funk track and a drum and bass track. So we had funk vocals that are sampled, and then we had original AI generated vocals, and we combined those with a drum and bass beat. And because of the rapid mixing of those relatively seamlessly, leveraging our studio, which combines AI tools and traditional digital music tools, we were able to actually get playlisted globally on both funk and drum and bass playlists, which is pretty amazing. And that track is an interesting example because it was playlisted out of funk tracks, and it actually just recently got added in the last week to the largest drum and bass playlist in the world, massive drum and bass. So it's very interesting. That's a real example from MindLab where funk and drum and bass have come together, and definitely enabled by the technologies we're talking about.
That's super cool. I love both. Love funk, love drum and bass. I love it all. So I love to hear that. How how do royalties work then? Does it change? Because royalties, you have multiple different producers and writers are taking, if people don't know, you're getting money off a song that's been played in high
Yeah,
rotation, low rotation on the radio or through streaming services. Each person that has contributed to that piece of
yeah.
work is making money. How does this change, or does it change when AI gets involved?
Yeah, I think, I mean, my perspective, this is my perspective. I'm not a lawyer, although my father was a lawyer, not necessarily a music IP lawyer, Toronto. But I think on the beat production side or on the production side, um, leveraging different technologies to warp sounds and sample sounds has been commonly done. And I think for the beat production and melody, I don't see as much of a debate. I think where it gets a little trickier from my perspective is on the writing and the vocals, because some of these AI tools are trained on regressing masses of data. Now, what data goes into there? I couldn't tell you. I don't have access to all the models. We leverage proprietary and best of breed tools. But for sure, people are using publicly available music in aggregate to derive different predictive models that produce music. So I think on the vocal side, where that's used to produce a vocal and a melody, that creates a little bit of a debate, right? So that creates a debate, and I think that's probably more of a legal concern if you're purely only doing 100% AI music, and if you do hybrid, where you take that as input and have artists modify that input, it's a little bit different. But clearly, there's a couple of unanswered questions on that, and potential for some good debate and discussion in both the media and in the courts in the years to come.
For sure. We look at defense systems now and
Yeah.
governments talking about how they include AI and threat abilities from AI. So we have to look at it from all different aspects, music, politics, you name it, culture. Do we need to reevaluate what we consider the essence of creativity and artistry?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I mean, I have always felt, that there's a lot of opportunity for engineering and science to play a role in the creative process. And in the software and in the data space, that's very true. I think a couple of the cities that I've lived in and spent many years in Silicon Valley, and I think there's a lot of creativity that's coming out of engineering and scientific research there. So I think in music, this is just really a particular industry that's kind of catching up a little bit to, for example, the technology industry, and is learning very quickly that there's a tremendous amount of creativity that can be unlocked by harnessing, engineering driven methods and, such as AI and others. So that's my view. I think a lot of creativity will come out of it if harnessed in the right way.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think so too. I think what we're seeing right now, and to be honest, I've talked to other artists in this space that are working with AI, fine artists, and how they're using robotics and AI to create art, and it's fabulous. And artists have said to me, these are the children of humanity. And when I when I was first said that to me, I'm like, I never thought of it that way. And they really are. And we are developing something that could really change the world, and within our creative process that outputs something that's so meaningful that could create revolution and different change. Music is the roots of counterculture and change. That's where, the counterculture movement in the 60s really was fueled by music. So we might see that in the years to come, that AI maybe will create the root in the system that fuels change through
Yeah.
music.
No, yeah, and it's a great point. And there's a lot of, music is about expression. And to your point, and I think it's been a pretty high barrier to entry to be able to express yourself with music. And what we're doing through AI is we're automating that process. So now all kinds of people, they're all micro creators, similar to the Mind Lab community on Discord, are able to now create music. So for example, I was, last week I was in London. I was at my cousin's place, and my nephews and nieces were interested in making songs. So we just jumped on an off-the-shelf tool, and it's called Suno AI, and they were able to produce custom songs for them to bring to school, literally in a matter of seconds. So all of a sudden, you have a 16-year-old high school boy and girl in London that in a matter of minutes can create their own song about how they're feeling, where they're going, and what they're doing, and they're able to connect on a different level. So it's creating all these micro creators that are expressing themselves in music, similar to the way that Facebook created micro creators expressing themselves in terms of pictures and words. So I think it's a logical extension of that, and it's ultimately going to enable many, many more people to express themselves musically.
Yeah, it's accessibility.
Yeah,
It's a big
absolutely.
part of it. Well, I remember when I was younger, if I had more, I do editing now, obviously, for my show, but I probably would have been doing more filmmaking if I was younger and had the accessibility of equipment and had the funds for it. It's not cheap back then, right? You're looking at the 90s and the 2000s for myself, that trying to create that as a young female was impossible because I didn't have the money. I was too young, but now kids can just grab systems and tools that are free or extremely cheap and learn how to play. And I love that. I think it gives accessibility, and it gives the ability for kids or anybody to have self-expression through art.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Absolutely. And even today, like digital music, to set up a studio, and I'll give you some, real numbers. I mean, probably, to get Ableton and all the plugins, thousands and thousands of dollars, not to mention the kind of power you'd need on a MacBook Pro. You might be looking at maybe 5,000, maybe $10,000. That's just the equipment. How many years would you need to be proficient? Andrew Hogarth, our lead producer, it's got about 20 years of experience. And, even if you had two, there's a time barrier, there's a course barrier, there's an equipment barrier. Now, contrast that with the example that I shared, Suno.ai, and forgive me if I'm butchering the name, but I think that tool costs like 10 or $20 a month, and my 15-year-old cousin can produce. So it's an order of magnitude reduction in the barrier to create custom original digital music than using a traditional digital music recorder.
for sure. I
Yeah.
remember when Napster came out and music labels, and even just getting into Spotify, everyone was like, what are we doing? How do we do this? They were so late to the game, unfortunately. It's obviously changed now. The music industry has obviously caught up, and unfortunately, they're doing deals like 360 deals that I don't always agree with, and taking a lot of artists' money instead of
Yeah.
giving it back to them. What are you seeing labels are doing now? And would you consider yourself a label? Or
Yeah,
is
we
this
do.
obviously, I'll
Yeah,
let you, yeah,
that's a great question. Yeah, we're fully so now I'm going to wear, the business we're fully vertically integrated. We've seen a lot. So we in founding the artist, we founded our own label, Underground Records. So we don't need to convince anybody of that. So we're fully vertically integrated. We own all of our tools. All the artists are in-house. We own the record label. and we own all of our distribution globally as we're scaling up. And similar to the model that I had in Toronto, we're going to also vertically integrate downstream. We'll be launching our first like mass scale, festival and big room events at the end of this year, next year. So that's our model, is to own the experience. So similar to Apple, when Apple, really penetrated on the music player, they wanted to have a lot of influence over the overall experience. And that's what we want to do. We want to infuse technology, AI, social and mobile at every stage of the value chain for this. So that's why we're fully vertically integrated.
That's
And
awesome. Yeah. And here's the thing. I'm like, I work with labels, on the public relations side throughout my entire career. I've worked from labels from Universal to Warner to Sony. I've talked to multiple of them and have been very fortunate to do that. So I see the pros and the cons of a label, right? And you do need them. As much as people want to be independent, there are
yeah,
wonderful things that come with labels too, like larger distribution or larger marketing components when being pushed. So and again, I know artists listening to that will be like, Chrissy, and I'll get a little bit of hate mail on this too. But I know that there
yeah.
are the negatives. I've seen pros and cons of both. But what are larger labels saying to you? I'm curiosity, like the
Yeah,
Universals and the Warners and the Sonys. What are they saying in
yeah.
connection to AI and how they're using it?
I haven't seen a tremendous amount of acceptance across artists, labels. I've seen a lot of resistance. And the larger, I wouldn't name any specific label. This is just what I've read, what I've seen. They're concerned about their other artists, that their artists are a little bit resistant to this. So it's kind of difficult for the mainstream labels. I really don't think at the actual artist and production level, there's been like mass scale commercial adoption of this yet. This is really in its infancy from an adoption perspective, and the technology is far ahead of the adoption. So that's why we're fully vertically integrated. So we're creating an experience for users. We're bringing everybody on board the journey, and that's why we're doing that. But I really, the labels are sitting, in my view, in the same camp as the artists. A lot of resistance, and I think you're going to continue to see that. This is a classic case of disruption
Mhm.
where many of the incumbents are resistant, and they've got an ecosystem that's built up that's dependent on the status quo. So I think you're going to continue to see a lot of resistance by large commercial labels, the ones you mentioned, I'm sure, to this. And I think a newer set of players will come up, and the entire model for distribution for music is going to be totally different in the future. Not just the development of it, but the distribution of music is going to leverage more modern technologies like social, and mobile. And it's already happening with Spotify. So on the mobile side, you can be a mobile Spotify artist and have millions of listeners without anything. So that's already happened on the mobile side. Thanks to Spotify, there's many mobile artists that just exist on Spotify and maybe on Apple. And I think we're going to see more of that. So a new breed of artist and label that's going to emerge over the next decade.
Yeah, I'm excited to see that. I love the evolution of music within this space and the business of it because it's just as interesting as the technology because you have to watch them adapt. Like it's almost like
Yeah.
a sport in its way. It's like what is the music industry? What do they have to do to survive,
Yeah.
especially labels, and how do they support the artists? Hopefully maybe AI will
Yeah.
leverage where artists again can work and there's different support systems that are given there. But we'll see, we'll see in the future. Can you tell me a little bit about your team and who makes up Mind Labs? We have engineers, we obviously have founders and CEOs. Who else is part of this fabulous team?
Yeah, thanks. No, great question, Chrissy. So at Mind Lab, we've only got two roles. You're either an artist or an engineer, and everyone falls into that category. On the artist side, Andrew Hogarth is our lead producer. He's got 20 years experience anchored in his Drunk Girl project, and now our lead producer at Mind Lab. Trevor Bell is our keyboardist. He's an artist. He produced many tracks in the early 2000s under the Club Kids and Stickmen labels. And on the other, that sort of makes up our artists. On the engineer side, we've got Daryl Martise, who hails from Salesforce, who's our key AI advisor and engineer. Reese Hillier, who's also from Toronto, who's our community specialist. So we consider him our community engineer. And of course, myself, I'm overseeing this. I'm a director, and the team kind of makes the magic happen on the ground. But yeah, really at Mind Lab, everyone is either an engineer or an artist.
My last question to you is, what will Mind Labs look like in the future, and what are the next projects that you're working on that you can share with me?
We're looking to make the largest impact on music and its evolution over the next decade that we've seen since Thomas Edison, I think, invented the phonograph, and I think it was 1877. We see a huge opportunity to harness social, mobile, and AI technologies in the production of music. And I think within only 3 months, 4 months, we've grown from 0 to 1 million streams to today we're at 3.8 million streams annualized, and that's fully independent, fully owned, fully integrated. So we're really looking to have a massive impact over the next decade on the entire music landscape from an end-to-end experience perspective, spanning, production, performance, and community.
That's awesome. Well, I look forward to seeing what you guys will be doing in the future. And thank you so much, Neel Lee, for being rebelliously curious with me today.
Thanks for having me, Chrissy.